I think this information has to get out, because a lot of the troops over there in Iraq, they have no idea what they're being exposed to. When they come back, if they're not knowledgeable about what's really going on now, they're not even going to get tested for depleted uranium. If they have headaches, they're just going to think they're stressed out. If they get swelling, they're just going to think it's because of the heat. You know, what's going to happen when they get their wives pregnant? And the same thing that happened to my child happens to their wives. Do we have to have hundreds of babies to be born the way my child was born for the government to say, you know what, there is a direct link between depleted uranium and birth defects? Does it have to be a numbers game? The same way there's a numbers game to get all the troops deployed to go to Iraq to fight a senseless war? I don't think any child should be a number. I think it's a life. Every life that was lost in Iraq is a life. It's not a number. And I think their family members should start questioning the government, because everything is being in a cover-up. Nobody wants to hear that. And I don't think that I should be coming on TV to expose my child to let the whole world know what's really going on. But if that's the only way that I have to do it, to save lives, the way the government is not saving the soldiers' lives, then you know what? That I guess my child's birth defect was not in vain. And I will make sure that everybody knows what's happening. Because they not only hurt my husband by making him exposed, they hurt my child. So now my child has to live with this type of hand, and I might lose my husband when? 5 years from now? 10 years from now? So he didn't lose his life in Iraq, but he loses it here in the United States, in New York, slowly, not knowing what's wrong with him, and them making him look like he's crazy. I don't think it's fair. I don't need to lose two people because of a war.
Radiation has a long history. It was discovered in 1895 by Rokke. By 1912, the first book was published on radiation-related cancers, and it took until 1929 for the radiologists to finally form a committee, and they did it to protect their own health. Herman Muller got a Nobel Prize in 1944 for showing the dramatic genetic effects of radiation on offspring, so it wasn't an unknown substance. Muller wrote an article in 1950 that talked about weakening the species. You're putting more radiation waste in the environment, which is hard to cope with, and you're producing people who are less able to cope with it. And, you know, you can't keep doing this. Anybody with common sense knows that, you know, you're working at both ends to really destroy the species. Depleted uranium is a waste product from the nuclear industry. In the 70s, there was talk about mixing it with ordinary metal and putting it into bicycles and refrigerators and stoves and automobiles. We raised quite a fuss at the time and opposed using it for any civilian purposes. But what happened very quietly is, behind the scene, the government gave it free of charge to the weapons manufacturers. It served the purpose of getting rid of the radioactive waste, and it provided free metal for the weapons manufacturing.
They have a weapon that is unbelievable. If you are only interested in fighting wars, you have a trump card weapon. Nothing can withstand depleted uranium. There is no tank, there is no armor that can withstand a depleted uranium shell.
You know, one of the things we were always told around the military environment is that the military takes care of its own. And I think we're learning that their idea of taking care of their people is very different than our idea of taking care of their people.
In early November, I received a call at the Daily News from the mother of a soldier. She found that he was very sick, that he had all kinds of problems, respiratory problems. He had some tests done at Fort Dix, and they told him he had the lungs of a 73-year-old man. She wanted him to stay here to have more testing, and his commander sent him an email to Fort Dix, get back here in 3 days or I'm going to list you as AWOL and put you up on charges. So the mother was very upset. What about all the others that are sick in Fort Dix? And I said, what do you mean? There's a whole bunch of them from his company that are at Fort Dix that have been brought back over the last few weeks for a variety of problems, and they've got all kinds of illnesses. Also, there were at the time, I think, about 14 or 15 of them. So sometime in late November, I went out to Fort Dix and to a Burger King out there, and about 12 or 13 of them met me at the Burger King and sat down and basically started telling me their stories.
I did exactly 5.5 years in the Marine Corps, and I re-enlisted into the Army National Guard to further my education.
Joined the National Guard in March of 1983.
21 years ago.
Yes, I've served 21 years.
20 years and 4 months after it was said and done.
The living area was a blown out university. It was a lot of rubble, a lot of debris, human waste.
Driving Hummers, escorting host nation trucks, driving 915s, flatbeds with diverse equipment, parts of tanks, parts of trucks, you name it.
You pass tanks or equipment that was burning where you actually feel the heat radiating from it as you drove by. That's how they were actually actively burning.
You would see blown up equipment on the right and the left, burning of oil, or different things. I mean, some equipment looked like it's been there years. You know, even in Camp Cedar, which is in the southern end of Iraq, which is considered to be one of the hot spots for like the depleted uranium area, you would see like holes in the walls.
Not even no windows. No windows, everything was wide open.
Some equipment that's been covered by sand, and I guess because of sandstorms, it's just been pushed over and you see little pieces. You can see it in the dirt.
We had a heliport right outside our work area, and when those choppers would come in, they would just generate a whole big swirl of sand and dust. I remember mornings just having that stuff blow on me, coming in at the end of the day, and have to shake off my bed with the dust and dirt that had accumulated on my bed.
Now, what are the dangers faced by our troops and also civilians in that area? This dust gets everywhere. It spreads into people's homes, it gets in your lungs where it stays for a long period of time, and people who have gone into these areas with large quantities of uranium dioxide show that the radiation count is about 1,000 times higher than what it is in terms of the natural background. Now, let me explain. Just by living on the planet Earth, you get about 100 millirems per year of radiation. That's a very important number, 100 millirems per year of radiation. However, once you are at these sites where you have depleted uranium being emitted, you can easily get up to 200 millirems per hour. So in other words, upwards of 1,000 or more times background radiation. In other words, it's like getting a chest x-ray every few minutes.
Sandstorms on the road, when the helicopters flew overhead, they kicked up the sand. When you went out on patrol or did your job and came back, all your cot, your personal gear, everything was filled with sand or some kind of film that was on it every day. You just couldn't explain, no matter how much you cleaned it. Yeah, it was like sand is gritty. Okay, this film would be like a layer of dust, but it was like brown. It was almost like very, very, very fine sand. We didn't know what it was. It was on my pillow. It was on my blanket. Every time I came, I just shook everything out and try and get rid of it. I mean, that's the best you could do. A lot of times you just end up sleeping in it. One of the guys that came back, he was our medic. He had the same symptoms, and he said, "Hey guys, listen to what happened while after you guys left. The Dutch Marines came into the area where we were living. They conducted samples of the ground and the air, and they decided not to live in the area where we were living. They decided to set up their base camp outside of the area where we were living because they said it was the radiation levels were so high off the meter that there was no reason to live there. I mean, we should move out."
When I arrived in country in April, I started to get swelling on my face, which I thought was because of the heat.
I just began to really feel fatigued. My headache started to surface. I developed some numbness in my hand. It was just was not strong.
I was getting headaches. I just thought it was because lack of water. That's how I thought it was. New environment, new changes.
And it seemed like the more I worked out, the more my body became weak and fatigued, and the headaches just began to increase.
I had an episode where I was urinating blood for about a week. When I came back, stiffness of the joints, pains, aches, headaches from the base of my neck all the way up to my temple.
Now, these weapons with depleted uranium in them, when they hit a hardened target, they burst into flames. And this is a very hot fire. It's 3,000 to 5,000 degrees centigrade, which is about the same pressure temperature you'd have in a kiln if you're making pottery. And when you fire it in the kiln, you use these high temperatures. So what happens is the uranium forms an aerosol, which is an extremely small particle, and at the same time it's fired or heated to such a high temperature that it melts actually, and it forms like a glass. So you have a different substance than uranium dust. You have a ceramic type of very small particles of uranium. So what I'm saying is you have to look at this differently. This is a new problem as far as toxicology goes. And you have a radioactive substance which is not soluble in body fluid and which we found remains in the body for a very long time. And so it can lodge in different organs in different places and be there for a very long time before the body can excrete it in urine. So the damage is due to the length of time of the exposure more than the strength of the source. You're talking about damage to cells, and the cells are part of organs. So if it damages the cells of the lungs, it causes respiratory problems. If it damages the cells of the heart, it causes heart problems. If it damages the cells in the liver, it causes liver problems. So it depends on where it is in the body, and you can have multitude of complex symptoms, as we found in the Gulf War veterans, from the same substance, depending on where it stays in the body. We were able to measure it in the urine of the veterans 8 and 9 years after the Gulf War was over.
While I was in Walter Reed Hospital, I had spells of dizziness. And I even told the doctor over there, he attributed it to a sinus infection. I was in the driest heat ever, and I don't know how I had sinus infection. But, I get that here in New York while I'm in the wintertime, the change of climate, the building up to the sinuses and everything, they don't drain properly. I understand that. But not when I was in 150-degree dry weather.
Nobody could really come to a conclusion why is it that these things were happening to me, because my MRI showed that it was normal.
They did a CAT scan and everything, and they found a 2.5 centimeter lesion in my liver. They thought I had stones. They didn't find any stones. Did an ultrasound. They couldn't find any stones. Then they're trying to tell me that apparently I had stones and I must have passed them, and I didn't realize it. When I was a kid, I had stones when I was about 19, and I know what it feels like to pass stones, and that wasn't it.
So once you begin to inhale this material into your lungs, small particles of uranium dioxide will begin to irradiate the nearby cells. And all that radiation is then concentrated into a very small area. So you have potential radioactive hotspots in your lungs as a consequence of this. So precisely because alpha radiation is not very penetrating, all of its energy is deposited in the nearby area of the areas that are affected. And the Pentagon itself now mentions the fact that there's a possible kidney, lung, and liver damage.
What was found on the MRI they felt was not at the cause of my headaches. I was told that I had some things attributed with aging. I'm 42 now. I was 41 then. I was 40 when I went to Iraq.
The lesions in my liver, they sent me for further tests, and they said that it was not cancerous. It was benign, and they attribute the fact that it's a birth defect.
I have a facial twitch. I have a droop. If you look at my face really well, and you put a line right down the middle, you see that the right side of my face has what you call a ptosis, or some medical professions, they will look at it as almost like a Bell's palsy. I never had that.
Then I was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Still had the headaches, the dizziness, the shortness of breath, the aches and pains, and just talking to the rest of the guys, and they all had the same thing.
I had a sonogram done on my wife because she got pregnant on my return, and it so happened my child was considered to have a birth defect of the right hand. She was missing fingers of the right hand.
So as we all got time to go home and search the internet, you type in depleted uranium, you get signs and symptoms. We all had the signs and symptoms. We started inquiring about a depleted uranium test, and basically we went back to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and told the colonel and told the major who was in charge of our handling of our medical welfare, we wanted to get tested for depleted uranium. So they looked at us like we were crazy. First of all, they said that there was no such test for depleted uranium, that everything we have is psychosomatic, that we're just all thinking about it, and it's just in our heads that we all have the same symptoms. And that they weren't going to test us for depleted uranium because that's not the purpose why we were there.
I went to Juan Gonzalez after I was sent back to Fort Dix. I was there not getting any answers, not getting any more appointments. So he said he would look into finding someone that would give us some tests for radiation. And he came up with Dr. Rokke, who had agreed to do the testing for myself and 8 other soldiers in my unit. They were suffering from a lot of the same symptoms I was suffering from. So we submitted samples, 3 samples of urine that was sent to Germany, Japan, and Spain. And I was told that I had a high level of depleted uranium in my system. So, you know, I was speechless. I didn't know what depleted uranium was. I didn't know where it came from. But now I'm told that I have this in my system. Well, I heard that some of the soldiers were exposed and they were tested positive for depleted uranium through the daily news, and they were getting retested through the military. And it wasn't because of them. They started giving the tests at Fort Dix on a voluntary basis. And I decided to take it at Fort Dix, and I got my roommate, who was one of the persons who was exposed to depleted uranium, he got a hold of Juan Gonzalez and told him about my case regarding my daughter having a birth defect. So what I did is that he spoke to me over the phone, and he said, maybe you should think about getting tested. I told him that I had gotten tested through the military, and he said, yeah, but maybe you should get tested independently just to have a disparity, see what the disparity is in the testing, if there's any. And I said, well, you know what, it's costly. I don't have the kind of money for it. And the Daily News said, well, Mr. Gonzalez said that they would pay for it, and so that's why I went ahead and I took it. Gerard's results are maybe 30 points higher than mine. I think mine was about 149, and Gerard's level was at 172. You know, I just could not see this man being turned away, and then not even being given answers as to the conditions with his daughter. Because as a matter of fact, I mentioned his condition when I was in Walter Reed. I mentioned Gerard before he had even gotten tested. A soldier that came back with the same conditions as me, but impregnated his wife, and now his wife has had a sonogram, and it's shown that the baby is missing fingers. I was told that depleted uranium has nothing to do with that.
And as far as he told me, that place in Germany was supposed to be one of the best places in the world because they break it down into the very minute isotopes, and so I felt very comfortable where the testing was being done. My child is born now, June 28th. She was born. She's happy. She has the birth defect, you know, but I have to deal with it. You know, the birth defect is the anomaly of the right hand. Basically, she has half a palm with a thumb finger fused into the palm of her hand. You know, and I really didn't pay it any mind. And then a couple weeks after that, Mr. Gonzalez calls me up and says he has the results of my test. And when he said that I was exposed, I was like, what? I said I couldn't believe it. You know, I really couldn't believe it first thought. And then he told me this is what it is, and you know what, you have almost 0.30 nanograms more than the soldiers who were living in the southern end of Iraq in the train station. So I was like, he said, you know, that could be attributed to your child having a birth defect, because there's studies that show that depleted uranium causes birth defects, and there's a lot of long-term effects that could happen. You know, the amount that we found in your urine, it could be 10 times more that in your lungs. You know, this is just a minute amount that we found in your urine. So I had this rage in me, and I feel like I needed to research everything. And my wife started researching everything, and then we found pictures of birth defects of babies down in Iraq. And when I looked at the picture of a child's hand, and I saw my child's hand, the picture of my daughter's hand and the picture of this child's hand is the exact same.
Uranium comes in two basic forms, U-235 and U-238. U-238 is the most plentiful found in uranium ore. However, billions of dollars have been spent by the superpowers trying to extract U-235. U-235 is very rare, and it is the stuff of atomic bombs. Once you mine, mill, and enrich uranium, you have the byproduct of this whole process. Now, this material is very cheap. In fact, the United States sometimes even gives it away for the military to be used for specific purposes. If you've ever handled DU, you know that waste uranium, if I were to hold it in my hand, just a small sphere of it, you'd go like this. It's unusually heavy, deceptively heavy, a small piece, smaller than a softball, weighs 1.7 times that of lead. It is one of the heaviest of all known metals because of the fact it has 238 protons and neutrons in the nucleus. As a consequence, the military likes to use it in shells, in shell casings. Now, when it hits armor steel, it actually will penetrate the armor steel and vaporize in the process. And that's where the danger is. Depleted uranium is not unradioactive. It's still radioactive, it still emits alpha radiation, and that's one of the main concerns. Approximately 375 tons of depleted uranium were fired in the form of shells during Gulf War I. And during the recent Gulf War, we're talking about perhaps 1,000, maybe 2,000 tons of this material was dispersed in the form of uranium dioxide. Now, the Pentagon, by the way, has its own rebuttal. The Pentagon, first of all, points out that we are talking about low levels of radiation, which is true. However, I should point out that this material has a half-life. The half-life of U-238 is more than 4 billion years. That's approximately the lifetime of the solar system, the sun, the earth, or about 4.5 billion years old. Uranium is basically an alpha emitter. There are three kinds of basic radiation, alpha, beta, gamma. Uranium is primarily an alpha and a gamma emitter, and alpha rays can be absorbed by tissue paper. Therefore, what's the problem? Well, there's a problem here. Precisely because alpha rays can be absorbed by tissue paper, most of the energy is then lost in that tissue paper, causing an enormous amount of damage per centimeter, much more than you get with beta radiation. Think of a crowd, and you have a speeding car plowing into the crowd. The car, of course, does not go very far into that crowd of people, but think of the damage. Think of the damage caused by the car plowing into a crowd of people. That's alpha radiation. So precisely because alpha radiation is not very penetrating, all of its energy is deposited in the nearby area of the areas that are affected. And the Pentagon itself now mentions the fact that there's a possible kidney, lung, and liver damage. The Pentagon's own documents reveal the fact that, yes, there is a distinct health hazard. In fact, the military personnel are warned to stay about 75 feet away from this material precisely because it is radioactive. Gamma rays will go right through lead. You can encase DU in solid lead, and you'll have some gamma rays coming out. Now, this is without people's permission, not to mention the fact that even if you are in a tank sitting next to the depleted uranium shells in their shell casing, you're also being exposed to large quantities of gamma radiation because you are in close proximity to these shells.
We were basically ignored. I mean, they didn't treat us for depleted uranium. They didn't bother to know about it. It wasn't until Dr. Durakovich and the Daily News gave us a test, and the results came back, that we went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and basically said, okay, here you go. There's no such thing as depleted uranium. There's no such thing as a test with psychosomatic. Here's the results. We took a test, and 9 out of 10 of us are positive.
When I produced that document, it just sent off an alarm throughout the whole hospital. I was then instructed to meet with some medical personnel, Lieutenant Colonel and Lieutenant Colonel Mercer, I believe was his name, Colonel Hack. It was another lieutenant and a civilian. And we were in this room for maybe 2.5 hours, 3 hours. It was a very long session. And at that time, I was asked why I felt, out of all the soldiers in Iraq, that I was exposed to depleted uranium.
Where do you get this from? Who's this? You know, and they're looking at it, and we're showing where it's coming from, the Depleted Uranium Institute, and who resided with the test, which is Dr. Durakovich, and we gave him copies of it. That was like on a Thursday. By that Monday morning, there was 4 colonels there from Walter Reed Hospital that came down to see us.
Did I know anything about depleted uranium? Was I in any exploded vehicles, around any burning vehicles? Was I in any vehicles that had been hit? My answer to them were, no, not to my knowledge. I don't know what was in the areas that I was in. All I know is that I had this test done when the Army would not test me, because I had asked about the situation in Fort Dix, and I was told that there was no known testing for depleted uranium.
We even brought up the fact that, could it be possible when the helicopters are landing and taking off, could it be possible that they lift up these particles of sand that have depleted uranium on it, throw it back into the air, and we can inhale it?
So, he went on to ask, well, who performed the test? I told him Dr. Durakovich, Anson Durakovich, and they told me, yes, they were aware of him. He's an activist, but they never mentioned that he used to work for them. And he was an officer in the military. My answer to that was, I am not an activist. My position is not one of an activist. My position is as a concerned soldier who has health issues that wants to have them looked into. Not only for myself, but for the other soldiers that are there, especially my unit that is still in country. If I've been exposed to something, I'm quite sure that they've been exposed to the same elements. We've been in the same areas.
The article came out in the news, and we were on the front page of the Daily News, and and it kind of gave a wake-up call to, I guess, a lot of people who's just been keeping it silent. I started getting phone calls from everybody, telling them that they're sorry, to know this is what has happened. But from the military standpoint, nobody knows where my test is, but they have the paperwork.
I believe that since this depleted uranium exposure issue has come out, I sort of feel I've been unfairly treated in certain situations. And, it just leads me to wonder, why, when a soldier is concerned about, soldiers are concerned about certain issues, that they're looked upon in a negative way.
And then the next day, the Colonel Washington from Walter Reed, she's the chief of preventive medicine at Walter Reed, she calls me up and tells me she only has the paperwork, the questionnaire that I filled out. And I told her, I have my questionnaire, and you have your questionnaire, but the third one, which is you have to fill out in triplicates, supposedly is with the bottles. So she said, we don't have any record of it.
When they did their testing, and I got the results back, they told me that my levels were too low for them to test, that my levels were at a safe level. Between 7 to 8 nanograms is supposed to be a safe level. So my levels were below that, so I didn't argue the issue. They didn't have the hard facts yet, but they gave me some numbers. And when I said, okay, I sent that back to Mr. Gonzalez, who in turn then took it to experts, took it to Mount Sinai. One individual that he took it to was a gentleman that developed the testing method that the Center for Disease Control uses. And he says there's no way, with the numbers that they've given this soldier, that they can test with that equipment the levels of depleted uranium in his system. So Senator Clinton took it to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and addressed him on that issue. One, they promised her that all the soldiers upon return from Iraq would be tested. Soldiers should not have to go and ask, should be tested. And two, about the equipment that's used. And I believe in the article he says something to the effect that yes, they're looking into sending the samples to Germany. Never happened for myself. I don't know if it's happened for other soldiers, but that has not happened for myself. As a matter of fact, other soldiers that have returned and have gone to the VA on the instructions of the Army, the military, have gone to the VA, those samples have been sent out to Baltimore and have not come back with answers. Other soldiers that have gone to the Army and had their samples done at the CDC, Center for Disease Control, a lot of them have not gotten their results back yet. One soldier in particular had his done at Fort Dix, and somehow his samples were lost. So it tends to lead to speculation that something is wrong.
My daughter has a birth defect the way she has now. She has to live with that. I do not know what kind of cognitive problems she's going to have in the long run, whether it be 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I don't know. But I know for right now she has a problem with her hand. She can't even hold her bottle like a normal child who tries to hold a bottle, or even try to creep right or push off right. She has to deal with that. One of the precautions I have to take every day is when she puts her hand in her mouth, that she doesn't put her whole hand in her mouth, because that's just one of the things that she's doing. You know what I mean? I have to deal with that. Do you know what it is to have a child who have her nail growing into her skin? It starts to bleed. You know, some people don't even know how to cut. I don't even know how to cut it. I have to just wait till it gets soft and blow it so it peels off. The military is not acknowledging anything that she has, so she's not being taken care of militarily with the hospitals. So as of November 4th, she has no insurance. Veterans benefits, I get 40% compensation, disability compensation for myself, which is chump change compared to a lot of people out there. I get about $593 a month and that includes everything from my child and myself, okay? I still get the same, I have the same issues, but what I care about is I'm taking care of my daughter. You know, I'm 30 years old, but she's only 3 months, 3.5 months. What's going to be the problem? What's going to happen to her down the road? It took them 20 years to help the Vietnam veterans. I don't want it to be the same. I want them to help them now.
I knew right away that her father must have been exposed to something, because between her father and I, we went back through generations of our families, and nobody had any history of birth defects. I looked into the internet, which I think is one of the best sources there is, and there were a lot of articles of depleted uranium and the correlation between that and the birth defects. There's a lot of also Iraqi babies that have the same exact type of hand anomaly that my child has. In addition to that, basically, it just showed how advanced science is. There's still research being done, but basically, when you keep reading more than one articles, I've read hundreds of articles in my time, it shows basically that there is a connection. Does the government want to acknowledge that the way the articles portray it, and the Pentagon from way back from the Gulf War? No, they don't want to acknowledge it. Depleted uranium is something that's very cheap. It's in the weaponry of the soldiers, and basically, it's easier for them to have depleted uranium, keep it as a cover-up, and just keep their soldiers out there fighting the war.
Depleted doesn't really mean that it's not radioactive. It is considered radioactive waste by the U.S. government, and it has to be handled by people who are recognized radiation workers, and it has to be maintained away from the biosphere. The thing that's very startling about radiation-related cancer is that it's occurring for young people. It's occurring for young mothers, veterans who are in their 30s or 20s, and so it's occurring too soon, at too early an age. Your natural chronological age measures how much natural background radiation you've been exposed to. So if you're 60, you've been exposed to more background radiation than when you're 20, and you don't feel it maybe at 20 or 30, but you do at 60. So it's cumulative damage to the cells. It's a very slow process, and it's accelerated at these low-dose radiation exposure levels. When you look at radiation exposure, you not only look at the strength of the source, and it's actually lower strength in depleted uranium than it is in natural uranium, but you also have to look at how much time the person is exposed to it. And this is pretty simple to understand, because everybody knows if you go out in the sun, 15 minutes is not the same as 3 hours. So as it's the same source. So as you increase the length of time, you increase the damage.
In fact, the cells within the area of the alpha-emitting particle, be it uranium, plutonium, radium, or the like, are in an area of intense radiation. That's high-level radiation. But the whole of the rest of the body may be receiving none, and what the nuclear industry does is take that radiation from this tiny particle and average it over the trillions of cells in the body, and then they call it low-level radiation. And so you get as much radiation as this by sleeping with your wife, or from eating a banana, or similar analogies.
One particle of DU in the lungs radiates 800 times the accepted annual level of radiation. So what's the impact of that continuing radiation over 10 years, over 15 years, as it continues to radiate all the surrounding cells and tissues and organs? And what happens when millions of people breathe the DU dust of the explosions?
Low-level radiation is a misnomer, and it's used by the industry to get away with their death-producing activities. The fact is that if you get an alpha emitter, be it uranium or plutonium or americium or europium or einsteinium or whatever, or radium, in your body next to a living cell. The alpha particle itself, composed of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, is a very dense, heavy mass compared to a DNA molecule. Now normally, if an alpha particle hits a cell, it will kill the cell. It's so damaging or cytotoxic. However, radiation, the strength of radiation decreases with the square of the distance. So cells on the periphery of that alpha radiation, and if you look at some plutonium or uranium under the microscope, within a complex of cells, the piece of uranium looks like a star shooting out alpha particles all the time, or plutonium. So the cells on the periphery of that radiation field will survive. And some of them may be affected by the radiation in that the alpha particle mutates or chemically changes a regulatory gene. And the regulatory gene is the one that controls cell division. And if a regulatory gene is damaged, it's quite possible that the patient will then go on years later to develop cancer.
Don't just fall down and die. Or contamination builds up in your body. And radiation shortens your life. Take a look at where your money goes. They built a worldwide nuclear show. You gotta get up and tell them no. You don't want to be radiated.
This weapon is scary. Because of my illness, to look at me, you would think there's nothing wrong with me. I have long-term, short-term memory deficits. I have toxic encephalopathy of the brain. I have developed thyroid deterioration. Our babies are born without thyroids. Our atomic veterans suffered from thyroid cancer. I am on Synthroid for the rest of my life now. I have developed suspicious squamous cancer cells of the uterus. I have tested 12 times for the military, and they want to keep repeating my tests.
And you won't hear about depleted uranium, even though in the face of what we knew, what the government knew from '91, they've used how many times? At least 5 times more depleted uranium this time, but they won't tell us. And they won't talk about it. I mean, they'll brag about our might and sound, shock and awe and all the rest, but they're not going to do anything that builds up a movement or opposition to what they do. Because they read their history at the War College, and they know that in war, the countries that have prevailed have been overwhelmingly those with the better weapons. If all else is equal, those with the better weapons win. So when you have bronze and they have wood, you win.
I did have a meeting with Pentagon officials, and their argument, they had several arguments. One that really struck me was that there are so many more hazards on the battlefield. This was minor, so the depleted uranium, when there are bullets flying all around you and missiles, was not worth bothering with. That was one argument. And the other was that they didn't really believe that all these bad effects could be connected with radiation.
I came back suffering from problems. They denied it. They said it was post-traumatic stress disorder, which it was too. But I had a lesion in my brain, and I had to get an operation on my brain. You can see it here. Half my memory's gone. I don't remember some childhood. I still get tremors, and they want to deny it. We got to stop this. This is serious, and it's going to be a lot worse than this. I'm 30 years old. I have no kids, not married. It's devastating my life.
There's no excuse for saying it's not as bad on the battlefield as bullets, because it leaves the soldiers able to fight on the battlefield, but it makes them sick after they go home, and their life is ruined. So in many ways, it's more deleterious.
But it's used because it's a very effective armor penetrator. It's incredibly dense. It's more dense than lead. And it slices through tank armor like a knife through warm butter. It's used in many weapon systems, including the M1 Abrams tanks, the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle, Tomahawk cruise missiles, the A-10 Thunderbolt, known as the Warthog, and the Navy's Phalanx anti-missile system, which is on board every ship in the U.S. Navy.
I was tasked by the Pentagon through an order to General Norman Schwarzkopf, who then sent the order down to D.G. Zulus to clean up the depleted uranium mess following the Gulf War. A Pentagon directive that I received as an Army medical officer. Within 72 hours of my team, the depleted uranium team, going up to clean up the mess in the Gulf, we were sick. And we have never been well since. What happened is we contaminated the environment, and it's all been proven. Ramsey Clark, Damasio Lopez, Doctors Without Borders, whole groups have gone in there and verified this stuff. We sent troops in there again since 1991, and they're still going in there. They're coming back sick right now. I had a report from the Army not even 48 hours ago where the troops that just came back are already sick. Total casualty count now, confirmed Department of Veteran Affairs casualty count, this includes me, because I got a disability for confirmed uranium poisoning caused by U.S. use, is 221,502 warriors. 1/3 of the Desert Storm Force is now on disability, official disability from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Now that doesn't include everybody that they denied care to, that they denied service connection for. And the number of dead right now is 10,324. What has happened, ladies and gentlemen, is the protective equipment that the U.S. Army issued to us during the Gulf War, and they have issued to the troops right now that are already deployed, is defective. The gas mask, the M40 gas mask, is defective. The United States General Accounting Office, Ray Decker, has testified before Congress verifying the equipment is defective, and yet the troops are being deployed with defective gas masks and defective mop suits, which is a chemical protective clothing. And when my staff, the staff of Bowers Raiders, the people that kept the people alive in the Gulf War, try to get medical care, and we go to the National Record Center in St. Louis, Missouri, we find out that the medical records have been deliberately and willfully destroyed. We find out that the personnel files have been deliberately and willfully destroyed. Not a question, 100% verification. We filed an Inspector General complaint, and after 1 month, they still haven't found the records. And we find out all over the world the same thing is happening.
They told us one day that the armor and the tanks we were training with was lined with depleted uranium, and that was basically it.
Personnel should wear gloves when handling suspected DU rounds, or mop gear should be worn. We weren't warned of any of that. I have photos of me sitting there in Iraq with other soldiers, not in uniform, no gloves. We handled these patients. We climbed in and out of the tanks. We retrieved bodies. Here I am in this picture with all these soldiers, no mop gear on, no gloves on, these other soldiers are. Were we warned? No. Were we exposed to this? I'll never have the answer. The Department of Defense refused to test me, to see me, to answer my questions. I have developed skin burns, which used to be a rash, and this is what I look like this week. From here down, I'm full of blisters this week.
They said they do emit a low level of radiation, but it's not enough to cause any damage.
With my headaches, my diagnosis was linked together with post-traumatic stress disorder. So it doesn't matter that my headaches happened in the country and they persisted, and they still persist to this day, whether I have any stress or not. The Army has determined that my condition has been attributed to post-traumatic stress disorder. My depleted uranium issue has been deemed medically acceptable. Sleep apnea, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, memory loss, all those issues have been deemed medically acceptable.
What does it mean, medically acceptable?
Your guess is as good as mine. Means that I don't want to give you compensation, is what I think it means. I've also been given a percentage as a single soldier with no dependents. I don't know how that happened with the information that I've given them.
How many kids do you
I have 4 children and a wife.
I began to have coughing fits, and I started coughing up blood. And I had no idea what it was. I wasn't sick at the time, didn't have a flu or anything like that. It seemed to have gone away. Then we were on a run, and all of a sudden I had difficulty breathing. And I was told to come back, went to the emergency room, they checked me out, checked my heart for some reason, my heart was fine. For one reason or another, I stopped coughing up blood, stopped having these fits, it went away, and the Marine Corps felt no reason to continue probing into it to see what was wrong. Because, the problem seemed to have, either taken care of itself or just gone away.
You heard about the weapons of mass destruction, that the guy might have this, so you have your gas mask to protect you. But you don't know anything about the DU, which might be the weapons of mass destruction that they have, that we are hurting our own selves with. You hear? And it's probably going to take 20 years or 30 years for them to find out how many people have died from their own stuff they're using on their own people.
I understand we signed a contract and everything, and here we are going to battle for Uncle Sam. The very least he could do is at least tell us the things that we might possibly be exposed to. I mean, burning oil, feces, and trash, taken aside, obviously, not good for the human body, but something like depleted uranium that they know for a fact causes birth defects, cancer, leukemia, the whole gamut of illnesses and related diseases that are caused by radioactive materials. At the very least they could have done is just at least told us that we're going to be exposed to it.
They told us that they were depleted uranium shells, and that's about all I was told.
This country, it's a war machine. The killers ride around in limousines. We gotta stop them, or they'll kill us all.
The Pentagon clearly considers the contamination of its own soldiers, of the environment, of millions of civilians, an acceptable cost. And we should remind ourselves this has always been true. Just consider their record on nuclear and chemical devastation over the past 50 years. If we're just started with the first development and use of nuclear weapons, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or we could recall the tests in the South Pacific where thousands of Pacific Islanders were consciously made guinea pigs.
Tell them, please, that the United States government now wants to turn this great destructive power into something for the benefit of mankind. And that these experiments here at Bikini are the first step in that direction.
And thus the Navy express to the people of the United States their welcome. Despite the fact that the Admiral of Bikini may be utterly destroyed come July the 1st. But the Navy, in their simplicity and their pleasantness and their courtesy, they're more than willing to cooperate. Although they don't understand the world of nuclear energy any more than we do, and though they have no way of understanding what the test is all about.
And let's remember the atomic veterans. Between 1946 and 1963, more than 250,000 U.S. troops were consciously exposed to atomic testing and then secretly studied by the Pentagon. They were never told the risks to their children, nor the tens of thousands of people who lived downwind of the test.
Put on goggles or face away from the target area.
Looking at an atomic explosion with the naked eye will cause a temporary impairment of vision, like looking at the sun. Nothing serious, but enough to draw the curtain on the show of shows no one wanted to miss.
30 seconds, final. Bomb away.
I myself walked up towards the bomb after it was ignited. Yes, the mushroom cloud was still in the air on our way up towards it.
We walked across ground zero.
Sometimes we'd stay up there for a long time, and it goes a long way up too. By the time it goes off, and you turn around from that light to look at it, there's already a mushroom cloud started up.
When you read the film badge, we had an actual reading, and these were entered into one log. Then we had a second set of books, which the records were to reflect that he did not exceed his daily allowance. They processed them, DuPont or General Electric. We were human guinea pigs. At the time, we were being used.
Oh, my one boy, he would have been 18. He died in '66, 21 months after he was born. He was born without an esophagus and stuff like that.
I have had cancer of the colon.
In the course of that following week, I believe it was, the child died.
But there's one thing about radiation. It's a wound that the GI receives, but it's unique because he can pass it on. He can give it to somebody else, his children and his grandchildren. That is the terror.
Let's remember Agent Orange, the chemical defoliant that was sprayed all over Vietnam. Millions of Vietnamese were the victims, and tens of thousands of GIs. And the Pentagon spent years denying the effects and denying the vets who desperately needed treatment.
I am a Vietnam War combat survivor. Unlike the majority of my brothers and sisters who were forced to go and fight in Vietnam, I happen to be one of the fortunate few who are not out in the street, that make up over 75% of the homeless, without any health care, without any housing, without a job. The same government that sent us to fight a war against the Vietnamese people, not for liberty, not for independence, but for profits, is the same U.S. military that continues to send our brothers and sisters, your sons, your daughters, mothers and fathers, to fight a war in the Gulf, not for independence, not for justice, for mega profits, for a handful of bankers and oil companies. And when I see the Gulf War veterans who were afflicted with a quote-unquote unknown disease, we have to remember that the U.S. military is capable of tremendous destruction, and it's also capable of tremendous cover-up. You only have to read the Pentagon Papers to see 30 years later what was done, what we were exposed to. Hopefully we won't have to wait that long to bring justice to those who have fought in the later wars.
But in '93, when we went back, the doctors were telling us that they were seeing something that really worried them that they hadn't ever seen before, and it tended to come from Bedouin families that would bring people in from the desert to the west and south of Basra, where Iraqi forces had been dug in, you remember, and to try to stop an invasion from Kuwait, and where the most heavily concentrated bombing of men in trenches and tanks and sand barriers and had gone on. And mothers would bring in children, and they had they'd bring in deformed fetuses. They'd bring in deformed children. 2 kids in the same family with what was finally diagnosed as leukemia. And both the numbers and the nature and Bedouins hadn't been coming in there very much, you know. And all of a sudden they're coming in trying to save their children.
I think the visible effects are in the children, because you see the birth defects and you see the children with leukemia. In one area of Basra, they built a special children's cemetery, and the man who was the grave digger said he was digging 4 and 5 graves a day for children. So it's a huge problem, and because it affects the fetus, it's internal. You know, you take it into the body, so it's the mother can pass it to the fetus. Or the veterans have had it, found it in the seminal fluid. So, you know, you're dealing here with damage at the most vulnerable point of life. And so the children got it worse than anybody.
My experience of DU on a personal basis was visiting the pediatrics hospital in Baghdad, meeting young children and their parents, or mothers usually, who live there with their child, and watching children helplessly dying of leukemia, meeting doctors who had drugs for 3 but had 45 patients in need of the same drugs, and knowing that in the 661 Committee of the United Nations back in New York, some of the sophisticated drugs required for leukemia treatment were deliberately being withheld by London and by Washington, thereby compounding the crimes they had already committed by using depleted uranium, by destroying the health system and water systems, and allowing hundreds, thousands of children to die unnecessarily from leukemia and much less dangerous forms of illness, no greater than diarrhea and dysentery, in fact, or typhoid, which could well have been dealt with had the drugs been allowed into the country by the British and the Americans and the Security Council.
Our babies are born with birth defects. When I came home, I knew that all the drugs that they gave us, everything we were exposed to, I had my tubes tied. I was afraid I would have a child born with birth defects. These babies here on the front of Life magazine are born with birth defects. This baby in here was one of my babies in our support group in San Antonio of 125 families affected by this illness. It was missing his ear, his eye, his heart was on the wrong side. This baby is born in Iraq. These photos been sent to me from Iraq. Same birth defects. This baby looks just like Cedric, our American baby. What happened over there?
I've interviewed all the doctors at Walter Reed who are in charge in the Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And the amazing thing is how they can keep repeating information that is completely wrong. That there has been no significant health impacts. It's a 56-page report which gives you chapter and verse of every single study that shows increased cancer rates, all kinds of other illnesses. The military is just lying.
People who are working against depleted uranium, it's very hard for them to get the word out. I went with a group of people to a meeting which was held in Congress led by Bernie Sanders, the Congressman Bernie Sanders. And we showed them, we were accompanied by 4 veterans with their wives, young, handsome men who had a whole life ahead of them, and they were all dying of cancer. And when Asaf Durakovic was also with us. And when we started to talk about the isotope 236 and tried to tell them that these young men were dying of cancer because of DU, there must have been an agent in the audience, because he took the book Medal of Dishonor, which talks about all of this. He held it up to the audience and he said, these people are working for Saddam Hussein. So whenever you try to explain to the world what's going on, there's someone there who opposes you. And you have to wonder what kind of sensitivity do they have when they see beautiful young men dying from DU, and instead of fighting to say we've got to stop it, continue to use it and do not encourage the government to stop.
DU contamination is a form of environmental racism. It affects poor communities and people of color here in the U.S. while targeting them around the world. It's on Native American reservations where 80% of uranium is mined and where almost all uranium waste is dumped. It's the frontline soldiers who suffer the greatest contamination, and the majority are people of color. Nor is it any surprise that DU assembly and testing facilities are mostly located in the poorest communities.
11,000 tons of uranium was mined between 1942 and 1945. From 1946 to 1968, 13 million tons of uranium was mined. Out of that, 1,500 uranium miners were used. Today, more than half are passed away from cancer illnesses, respiratory diseases. The United States government, they're not going to be paying out millions of dollars to future victims of radiation exposure.
They told us not to write our names and not to be interviewed. They told us not to record. They're from Washington.
From 1954 to 1968, 4 uranium mills were constructed. The tailings, over 1,000 underground and open pit mines still remain on our reservation. Children playing in the tailings. Sure, they have signs, beware, but most of our people still don't understand or read English. The homes are being built from the tailings. 600 homes are already being lived in that were made from the tailings, uranium tailings, the actual rocks that come from the mines.
When David Sanes was killed in April 1999, we entered the bombing range in May 8th and established a civil disobedience camp right in the middle of the bombing range. So from that camp we used it as a base for scientific studies and observation, and we began to document all the environmental impacts that the Navy had done in Vieques. For the first time in 60 years, civilian investigators could go in that area, so we began looking for what was there. For almost 8 years, we have been asking the Navy if they used Vieques for practicing with depleted uranium bullets and penetrators. Well, they always denied that they did that kind of practice, but in May of 1999, we received this letter through the Military Toxics Project, a non-profit organization in the United States that sent it to us as a solidarity act, because the Navy didn't answer to us, but they did answer to Military Toxics, and basically the Navy admitted for the first time in history that they had used depleted uranium ammunition in Vieques in an unspecified date. The Navy, after that letter admitting the use of depleted uranium in Vieques, then they specified they said it was a one-time accident, and they had shot in that accident 263 depleted uranium bullets, 25 millimeter diameter. To us, it's, well, they only recuperated, they only got 77 of those bullets back. So nobody knows what happened with the other almost 200 bullets. But when we were documenting and studying the eastern part of Vieques, we found in several places distant from where the Navy said they had this curious accident that showed targets like tanks and heavy equipment with holes that are perfectly compatible with depleted uranium penetration. We think that their explanation that they had this accident here in Vieques and also in Okinawa more or less at the same time is very difficult to believe that this ammunition that is stored in Navy bases in Florida came accidentally to Vieques, and they was put accidentally in a plane, and accidentally that plane shot in the eastern part of Vieques.
Cancer rate in Vieques was smaller than the average in Puerto Rico for every year up to the years of 1970 to 74. At that moment it was still less than Puerto Rico, but at that moment the incidence of cancer started to climb in Vieques, and it went over the rate in Puerto Rico at the end of the 1970s, and it started climbing in a linear fashion increasing more than the rate in Puerto Rico, so that for the years 1985 to 1989, the incidence of cancer in Vieques was 27% higher than the average in Puerto Rico, and it was the higher cancer incidence rate of any other municipality in Puerto Rico.
And now that we're stuck with mountains of radioactive waste, what are the great minds of today working on? Space nukes, bunker busters, depleted uranium bullets and armor, third-generation hydrogen bombs, and virtual reality computer simulations, so that we can give lip service to having stopped nuclear testing while we go merrily, madly on our way, building still more bombs, thinking up even grander schemes of nuclear terror.
Oh, my country, we shall free you from the ones who try to bleed you. We'll bring justice to the people, liberate them, they will heal you. We'll bring peace far and wide. Our goodwill will turn the tide. Do what's right, right the wrongs. No need left to sing this song. Where is my country?
When you hear powerful, moving stories of the people that have been victimized by the nuclear fuel cycle, when you realize that we now shoot nuclear waste into other people's backyards, you realize that this story is obscene. And this is a message that has to go out. And yet, where do we see the national media here? I don't see network news. I don't see Channel 2, Channel 4. I don't see the big media here today. And it just goes to show you that the revolution is not going to be televised. And it just goes to show you that we have freedom of the press if you happen to own one.
What do you think of the credibility of the military investigating itself?
The military investigating itself is the fox guarding the chicken coop. You never have an investigation by people who have something to preserve or something to hide. You always have an independent group investigating, a group of doctors who've made a mistake, a group of architects who've built a building that's collapsing, or the like. The military, in this instance, in the Gulf War situation, the Gulf Syndrome, I mean, they hid the facts for years that they blew up chemical facilities, let alone have they even started to talk about the actual nuclear war that they conducted in that Gulf region. So I wouldn't trust them as far as I could kick them.
The government knew well the lethal short and long-term effects of depleted uranium way before Desert Storm. This is obvious if you look at the various reports filed by the Army Environmental Policy Institute or the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, or other government-sponsored scientific studies on DU. But it's clear on the use of depleted uranium, especially on the battlefield, that it had grave potential medical consequences and that military personnel would be exposed if DU weapons were used. Looking at these reports, it's even all the more irresponsible and misleading for the Presidential Advisory Committee on Gulf War Illnesses to conclude that depleted uranium is not a causative agent in what it says are the, quote, complaints by Gulf War veterans about, quote, medical problems. But they also conclude in the very same reports where they describe the grave hazards of DU, that if they were to admit these hazards, it would involve having to pay out potentially huge sums of money to sick and dying veterans and their families for generations to come.
Our first stop was in Mehanri, a small fishing village in the northwest coast of South Korea. It is the home of 3,200 residents. 50 years ago, the U.S. Air Force set up a bombing and strafing range named Kunni, surrounded by barbed and razor wire. You can see well-tended fields spreading throughout the area. Villagers are allowed to farm, as long as they get a permit and pay taxes to the U.S. military. Fighter planes based in Osan, Okinawa, Guam, and the Philippines fly and shoot over the civilian-populated area trying to hit the circular targets a few kilometers away. A red flag is raised on bombing days to alert the villagers of the practices. Lockheed Martin, one of the world's largest defense contractors, provides weapons to the U.S. Air Force and manages Grenee. One island has been bombed away, and the largest remaining has been reduced to 1/3 of its original size. They drop between 400 to 700 bombs daily, except weekends and holidays. Even depleted uranium bombs have been used.
After 6 years of denial, the U.S. government had to admit that they had used thousands of weapons of DU. And right after the press conference, we charged the U.S. forces with all documentation from papers and etc. That afternoon, the official spokesperson of the U.S. forces in South Korea had admitted that, yes, we have DU weapons in South Korea.
Several green buses brought Korean police by the hundreds. The one in red shirts are specially trained in martial arts.
Que se les moviliza para proteger los intereses de una nación que no es la de nosotros.
Several busloads of students had been stopped a few hundred meters away. Since the police had placed barricades to prevent the buses from getting into the rally site, the students marched the rest of the way. On August 18, 2000, as a result of the constant demonstrations, the U.S. forces of Korea announced that they would stop the strafing practices.
Depleted uranium shells causing the cancer by polluting the wells. Hell, even our soldiers got the sickness from radiation. Tell me who will stand witness? Where is my country?
Today, there is no weapon that can challenge the Pentagon militarily. There's only one thing the Pentagon fears. That's people informed and mobilized and angry. It's the only way testing stopped. It's the only way wars are challenged. It's the only way Agent Orange was packed up.
We can accumulate information, we can bring people together, but information is not enough. You must take a risk. I must take a risk. All of us who are organizing this effort must take a risk, and as one speaker said, do something.
The symbol of our challenge, this is the moment for DU. We can't come to grips with this. Is it conceivable that it is acceptable by any human standard that we would permit for one moment one shell the depleted uranium to be used, to be manufactured, to be stored? No, stop it now, end it now, abolish it, prohibit it forever, and make it the war crime it is.
Remember, there's one thing more powerful than a hydrogen bomb, and that is the power of a people united, a power of a people educated, a power of a people enraged that this obscenity is being committed against other people. But I believe this is a winnable battle. When the American people realize that we're shooting nuclear waste into other people's backyards, poisoning our very own, inflicting unparalleled casualties on other people, then I think the American people will rise. And we will see the day when nations feed our DU, our swords, into plowshares.
Information is power. And information, when it's mobilized, it actually undergoes a chemical transformation. It becomes outrage. And then it has explosive potential. Potential to force great, sweeping changes. And that's our secret weapon.
Is your money that good? Will it buy you forgiveness? Do you think that it could? I know you will find when your death takes its toll, all the money you made will not buy back your soul. All the money you made will not buy back your soul. All the money you made will not buy back your soul. Masters of war, you that build all the guns, you that build the death planes, you that build the big bombs, you that hide behind walls, you that hide behind desks. We just want you to know we can see through your mask. Let me ask you one question. Is your money that good? Will it buy you forgiveness? Do you think that it could? I know you will find your death takes its toll. All the money you made will not buy back your soul. All the money you made will not buy back your soul. All the money you made will not buy back your soul.